What surprised me most was how Maycomb almost feels like a character itself. Every detail, from the red dirt roads to the sagging courthouse, seems to shape the story's mood before we even meet most of the people.
That's true, and the economic backdrop is crucial. The Great Depression hit Maycomb hard. Farmers couldn't pay in cash. Professionals like Atticus were often paid in goods, and you can see how poverty influenced every interaction.
But if the town is so stuck in its ways, why does Scout sound a little hopeful? She mentions Roosevelt's speech, and there's this sense that things could change, even if it's slow.
Here's the takeaway. Tradition dominates, but there's a subtle undercurrent of optimism. The Finch family's deep roots in Maycomb show how history weighs on everyone, yet Scout's perspective hints at the possibility of breaking old patterns.
And those old patterns aren't just social, they're physical. The courthouse is literally sagging, and people move slowly, almost as if the town itself resists change. That inertia foreshadows the resistance we'll see to new ideas later in the novel.
So, does that mean Maycomb represents more than just one town? Could it be a stand-in for American society in the 1,930 seconds, with all its struggles and contradictions?
Absolutely. Maycomb's quirks and tensions mirror the broader issues of the era: economic hardship, family loyalty, and the challenge of moving forward when the past still holds so much power. What surprised me most was how Atticus's choice to become a lawyer, instead of staying on the family land, shifted the Finch legacy. That single decision seems to set the tone for everything else: values, reputation, even how Scout and Jem are raised.
That's a great point. If you look at the numbers, only a small fraction of Southern families at the time moved away from agriculture. Atticus's move into law and town life signals a break from tradition, but it also puts the Finches in a unique social position, respected, but not part of the old money elite.
But isn't it Calpurnia who really holds the family together day to day? She's strict with Scout and Jem, but she's also the one who teaches them about respect and boundaries, especially when it comes to race and class.
Here's the takeaway. Atticus and Calpurnia work almost in tandem, even if their methods differ. Atticus gives the kids freedom to think, but Calpurnia enforces discipline. That balance is rare, and it shapes Scout and Jem's sense of justice.
Can we dig into the family's social standing a bit more? The Finches are related to almost everyone in Maycomb, but they're not wealthy. That puts them in a complicated spot, respected for their name, but not for their bank account.
I partly agree, but I think their reputation comes more from Atticus's integrity than their ancestry. People trust him, even if they don't always agree with him. And that's what sets the Finches apart.
Only after 2 generations do we see the full impact. Simon Finch's legacy is about land and tradition, but Atticus's is about moral responsibility. That shift is what makes the family's story so relevant to questions of class and race. What surprised me most was how quickly the children's stories about Boo Radley turned him into almost a supernatural figure. It's like the less they knew, the more powerful their imaginations became.
That's a classic pattern. Kids fill in the blanks with whatever feels most thrilling or scary. There's a study from 2017 showing that children are 60% more likely to believe exaggerated rumors about people they rarely see. Boo's isolation just amplifies that effect.
But if Boo had just come outside once, would they have stopped making up stories? Or would they have found something else to be afraid of? I wonder if the mystery is what really keeps them interested.
Here's the takeaway. The legend serves a purpose. It gives the kids a shared adventure, but it also reveals how quickly fear can become a substitute for understanding. The town's intolerance feeds right into that.
And it's not just the kids. Adults in Maycomb reinforce those myths by keeping their distance from the Radleys. The boundary between curiosity and cruelty gets blurry, especially when Atticus steps in to remind his children about respect and empathy.
I think it's easy to forget that Boo is a real person, not just a story. When Scout starts to see him as someone who might be lonely or kind, it changes everything. Maybe that's the moment childhood curiosity starts turning into something more mature.
Exactly. The shift from legend to empathy is subtle, but it's the heart of the story. Boo Radley stops being a monster and becomes a neighbor once the children are willing to look past the myths. What surprised me most was how Scout's ability to read something you'd expect to be celebrated actually lands her in trouble with Miss Caroline. Here's the takeaway. School, for Scout, becomes a place of frustration instead of discovery.
That's a sharp observation. If you look at the educational theories Miss Caroline brings in, they're meant to standardize learning. But Maycomb's kids, like Scout, already have their own ways of knowing, especially when it comes to understanding families like the Cunninghams. For instance, Walter's refusal of lunch money isn't just about pride, it's a survival strategy shaped by poverty.
But if Miss Caroline had really listened, maybe she could have seen that. Why do you think she was so quick to shut Scout down instead of asking more questions?
Institutional education often assumes a blank slate, but Scout's already learned so much at home, especially from Atticus. The classroom's rules can't account for that kind of lived experience, and it's a mismatch that leaves both teacher and student frustrated.
Exactly. And the contrast gets sharper with Burris Ewell, who only shows up for the first day. The school can't reach him, not because he's incapable, but because the system isn't designed for his reality. It's a clear sign that class and poverty shape what education can actually achieve.
So maybe the real lesson for Scout isn't about reading or writing, but about understanding people, like when Atticus tells her to step into someone else's shoes. That's something you can't really teach from a textbook.
Only after 2 iterations, we realized how their so-called games, like acting out Boo Radley's life, blurred the line between innocent fun and something more intrusive. Here's the takeaway. Play isn't just play. It's a rehearsal for how kids test limits and figure out what's acceptable.
That's true, but I wonder if peer pressure plays a bigger role than we admit. When Dill dares Jem to approach the Radley house, it's not just about curiosity, it's about proving courage to the group. Studies show that children as young as 6 will take risks they'd avoid alone, just to fit in.
But isn't that also how they learn empathy? When Atticus steps in, it's like a reality check. Suddenly, they have to think about Boo as a real person, not just a character in their stories. It's scary, but it's also the first time they question if their fun might actually hurt someone.
Exactly. Atticus's intervention is a turning point. He doesn't just say stop, he asks them to consider Boo's perspective. That's a subtle but powerful lesson in moral awareness, and it sets up the bigger conflicts they'll face later.
Can we really draw a clear line between imagination and intrusion, though? Kids naturally blur those boundaries. If adults step in too soon, do they risk stifling creativity? Or is it necessary to prevent real harm?
I think it depends on the intent. When they start making up stories about Boo, it's partly because they're scared and want to understand what they can't see. But once it turns into dares and spying, that's when it crosses into something less innocent.
Here's what stands out. Childhood games are more than entertainment. They're a training ground for courage, conformity, and belonging. The challenge is teaching kids where imagination ends and respect for others begins. Thanks for joining us as we unpack these early lessons. The real test is how they'll carry them forward.